strength of numbers, leverage your giving, teach the art of philanthropy to the next generation, and enjoy your philanthropy. And I want to speak with Jim afterwards, because I left Procter & Gamble to run politically. And I think everything he's doing at Xerox, he needs to start doing with the Liberal Party, my favorite, he can do it whatever else, to get more women leading in politics so that you start to advance the whole cause. But I think philanthropy, for me, has been one of the most powerful things, because you have your values at home. Wasn't it your mother that taught you to share first? I mean, your dad agreed, but wasn't it your mother? And didn't your mother say to your father, you know, what's yours is mine and what's mine is my own? And so my point is, women really are coming into their own. And the more I've been invited to participate and the more I've been contributing, not just financially, but also with a lot of the things that I learned at Procter & Gamble, the more you're invited to do. Some of my clients are female business owners who are being more successful all the time and wanting to access that next tier of opportunity. And they have the wealth. And I've said, be a major giver. That's what gives you the access to the Peter Monks and the Maureen Kimps and, you know, leading philanthropists in the community who are also very significant business people. So huge opportunities in philanthropy.
Thanks, Nancy. Now, Terry, I'm going to get down to some of the, now that we know the kind of wealth that's out there, what are you seeing in emerging strategies and trends among the women who are giving?
Well, there's a lot of, mechanisms for people to give. And I think women are now taking on and using these mechanisms more so now than they have in the past. And, you know, traditionally, you will have seen, you know, people start their own foundations, whether a private foundation or a public foundation. More and more women are starting their own foundations, and they could simply be to leave a legacy. Last week I met two women who had just created foundations, both of them in honor of their husbands, one whose husband had died of a brain tumor, and her foundation is specifically focused on studying brain injuries and brain issues and diseases and finding solutions to them. The other's husband had died from cancer, and so she created a foundation specifically on a specific research area in cancer research and genomes and scientific studies. And I think 10 years ago, these women wouldn't even know what to, they may have given their money to the hospital to do this, but they are involved, they are running the foundation, they are working with the researchers, they're there and they're engaged, and they want to see what that impact is and make the difference. These are very wealthy women who, at the top level can do that. If you move down a little bit, there are community foundations where you can have what's called a donor-advised fund. And you can simply deposit some money in the community foundation. Usually it's a minimum amount of around $15,000 or $25,000. That stays within the community foundation. Once you give your money to a foundation, whether it's your own or someone else's, you cannot get it back. That is a gift. You've given it to charity. So it stays within the foundation. The interest that's gained each year off of that is then given to charity, and you as a donor can advise the foundation where you would like that to go. You can even call your donor advised fund a foundation, so it could be the Terry Smith Foundation. Women more and more are doing things in their own communities and getting together, and you may have heard the term giving circles, and they're very much like a book club. You get together with 2, 3, 5 women. You decide how much you all want to put in as a philanthropic gift, and it can be as little as $25. It can be whatever you want. But say you had 5 women and you wanted to give $100 each. All of a sudden, you as an individual giver, have leveraged your $100 into 5. And now you as a group of women can then decide, well, what do we do with this, and who do we help, and on what level do we help, and do we help at an international level, do we help at a national level, or do we help in our local community? And you begin to explore together the differences and what's important to you as a group. And then you decide if it's education, if it's poverty, if it's health, if it's culture. and then you get into, okay, so which organization do we support? So it's a real, giving circles are a great way for people who aren't quite sure that they want to create their own foundation or do something in a major issue, but to work together with other people. And it's primarily women who do this, and simply because we search out one another and we help one another, and so it's becoming more and more popular in local communities. You may have heard the term microfinancing, which is really loan-based, and you can give as little as $10, loan $10 out to a woman in Kenya who buys 3 goats, and she raises the goats and either sells them or shaves them and uses the wool to create her company. She gives you back the $10 when she's developed it, and then you can then give that to another person to develop their business or take her to another level. So it regenerates itself. It's less riskier than actually giving away your money, but it's certainly a new mechanism, and more women are taking those on. So those are some of the vehicles and mechanisms that women are using.
Terry, have you found any differences in the ages of women? There are different approaches to how they handle philanthropy. Is the Millennium Woman different than me?
Yeah, absolutely they are. And I just want to refer to, I hate to say that.
I didn't tell you how old I was, did I?
Yeah, just a little tiny bit. But I just want to refer to some research that was done in the States, of course. The States are miles and miles ahead of us in philanthropy, and I am so grateful that there are people there that have done this research. So Lynn Lancaster and David Stillman did a study and wrote a book called When Generations Collide. And so they talk about the different levels of transition. And so they talk about the traditionalists, who are basically those born before 1900s, and are, my grandparents, my parents, and lived through that. What they said was things that happen in the world affect you and then affect your values. So at that time, we had the World War I and II, we had the Great Depression, movies were starting to come into vogue. People at that time were really dedicated and believed in their church and the government and had faith in them, and therefore tended to give to those who needed more, and to those who were less fortunate. And so that's that group. Then there's the baby boomer group, of which I certainly am one. And we had things like the Cold War, JFK's assassination, we had Woodstock, we had television, we had Kent State, we had booming post-war economy, we had civil rights, we had women's rights. All of those things came into being, and so that heightened women's roles, and it heightened people's awareness, and so then people began to support causes, and so they would support a women's cause or a human rights cause, and you will remember all the marches and the things that happened back in the 60s and the 70s. The Generation Xers, which are 65 to 80, now in the 31 to 45-year-old, experience Watergate, downsizing of corporations, so things that, their parents worked for the same company year after year, doesn't exist anymore for them. The AIDS epidemic, skeptical of everything, skeptical of government, of military, of church, of education, of whatever, a lack of faith, and they become motivated by values of opportunity, freedom, and their giving is quite different. Their giving is more so they find a cause, they go at it, they work at it, and then they move to the next thing. They're not so dedicated to what's happening next door. It's what's going on around and about there. The Generation Y, the Millennium group, they have survived Oklahoma City, the tsunamis, the internet, cell phones, mobiles, Twitter, all of this stuff. They are the group that embraces knowledge, embraces information, becomes more aware of everything faster than any of the age groups that we have. And so they, right now, are influenced by what their peers are doing. They're influenced by what's going on out there in social media. They will latch on to a $5 mobile, whatever, and you all know what I mean, that stuff that they do. Anyway, And so their giving is quite different, and it's quite sporadic, and it's, and if they're not getting something out of something, they just move on. That was $5, I'm over here doing another $5 over here. So quite different between the millennium group, and where my grandparents would have been in giving to people who are around them and less fortunate. And I think particularly when you look at the transfer of wealth and what will happen, the baby boomers and the Generation X group will probably carry that intergeneration of wealth and be responsible for most of that. And you need to keep in mind sort of when that wealth was created and why the people who had that did what they did in a philanthropic way. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to carry that through, but certainly to have an awareness about the beginnings of things and how things started. So.
That's great, thank you. Nancy, that brings us to a really good question for you then. Knowing all that, if we were about to get started, where do we start? What are some of the watchouts in giving philanthropy?
Okay, well, again, just building on what Terry has said, with the differences, with the generational differences. If you're a boomer and you expect to inherit the wealth, or you have the wealth, and you're going to be passing it on to your kids, and their values are not necessarily the same as yours, then from your overall wealth plan, you need to structure that very, very carefully. Otherwise, a lot of it could have been in vain. And more, there are very, very sophisticated ways that you can do that with a very comprehensive wealth plan, and I'm sure you've worked on a lot of those. But for young people, if they're really passionate, if you've got a person in your midst who's passionate about the environment and gets very annoyed that a lot of other people aren't, then one way that you can do that at a very young age, and you can change as you go, is with an insurance policy. If you're very young and you have an insurance policy, then the amount that it's costing you is very little. Obviously, you're expecting that person to live to life expectancy, so that donor is going to collect a long time from now. But again, with these organizations, they're very happy to bank all of those pledges that have been given. Every year I'm invited to Women's College Hospital because I have donated an insurance policy on a revocable basis, which means I can change the beneficiary anytime I want. It's not irrevocable. But I go to a spirit of giving event, and you see other people who have built those plans into their estate plan. So there are many, many, many ways that you can give, and whoever your financial person is, or the TD Bank is incredible. They have a donor-advised fund with that's $25,000, I think. So anytime you're in your bank, start the conversation or with your investment advisor, because there's just a plethora of ways that you can give. You just have to have a lot of room on your Visa or in your bank account, put the numbers in, and away you go. You've got a whole bunch of new friends. Very popular.
Great on. Thanks, Nancy. All right, with those thoughts in mind, I'm going to turn to you, Cynthia, and ask, what are your thoughts on how to imbue that philanthropic spirit in our peers and generationally down to our families? How do we make it viral?
Well, if this room were full of men, I probably wouldn't have to say this, but it's two words. It's leadership and visibility. And I said earlier that men are much more motivated in terms of their philanthropy and their giving by recognition. Women have a much greater propensity, particularly of larger gifts, to give anonymously. From some, I believe, well-intentioned but misguided sense of humility, or we don't kind of like to talk about money sometimes, right? And so this is what happens, of course, is that your visibility cannot, if you're not visible and you're giving anonymously, I'm talking about whether these are big gifts or even, when you're invited to give, someone sends you an email and it's a friend-raising thing and you're able to give. I mean, again, when you look, I'm looking at those, I know all of those anonymous givers are women. Men's names are out there. And the reason that's important is because that's actually how you inspire peers and other people. Your own leadership. Just as in the ways we were talking about, your mentoring, whether you're talking about your peers or even the next generation, or our daughters, my 16-year-old daughter, I want her to see me being a philanthropist. I want her to know that that is what life is about, right? So the first thing really is very much about visibility. And, we started 10 years ago, we started Women's Leadership Council, only 10 years ago, that's amazing. But now in 120 communities, there are 50,000 women who have contributed more than $700 million in the last 10 years. And they're going to make $1 billion, they're going to take it to $1 billion by next year, because they are absolutely on fire. And so they are, it's peer giving, it's beyond, it's giving circles, but at a really high level. I mean, it started in Atlanta. And it started with a group of women, because this gets to my next point about leadership, which is demand a leadership table, a seat at the leadership table, and be on the boards, just like the earlier panel was talking about that conversation. Because the women's leadership movement in the United Way movement started with a group of women who went in and said to the board that we have something called the Tocqueville Society. Perhaps some of you are members of that in the United Way, right? So this is the $10,000 a year annual giving and greater, named after Alexis de Tocqueville, who observed in Democracy in America that we were an incredibly philanthropic community and society, different from what he had experienced in France and in Europe. So it's named after him. There are 22,000 Tocqueville members in the United States, so giving huge amounts of money. They asked these women, and they said, you know, you've been taking this as a couple. So my husband and I are giving. I have the wherewithal, thank you very much, to give my own $10,000. And they said, we will step forward and start a women's Tocqueville Society, but only if you're going to put some of us on the board, because there are way, way too many white men sitting around that board. So if you want us to raise money and to be leaders, you give us a seat at the table of how the money is going to be spent in governance of the organization. So my two thoughts for you are, first, about visibility. Give and give proudly, and do it not because so much about the recognition, because the recognition is important in that it helps you be visible and lead. And then in terms of the leadership, really demand a seat at the table. Get on the board if you can. It is slightly easier to get on boards of nonprofits, although it still takes all the same things that I think the last panel discussed. The networking is still important. You have to care about it. It has to be something that you care about. So find something you connect to and find out. But you probably bring a skill or a gap. Like I said, my first start on boards was because it's marketing. They needed marketing, and they needed that kind of help. Whatever your skill is, you have got, because I know what Proctor has honed in all of you, no matter whether no matter what part of the company you came from, you have an incredible business acumen that's very valuable. And go and my advice to you is to not only get yourself on the board, then volunteer to be on the nominating committee. And you will now then begin to nominate and put other women on that board. Because just as in the for-profit sector, I mean, it's absolutely, data proven that if boards are at least 30% women, they are more productive, more productive organizations. The same is true of nonprofits. And even though there are lots and lots of women in the nonprofit sector as staff, partly by our nature, partly by what they pay, all kinds of reasons, we're still not on the boards nearly enough. It's still not enough boards. So that's really the way to inspire and then to move to the next step. A lot of these women's leadership organizations in United Way also have what they call WINGs, Women's Initiative Next Generation. And they are mentoring young women, and they're bringing them in, and it's an incredible win-win. They're mentoring them for business, they're mentoring them on philanthropy. It becomes a great way of getting together. And we just 2 years ago started Student United Ways. In 2 years, we're on 60 college campuses, and it's a big idea, I think. We're going to take it around the world, because if students, if you can get them, they've grown up doing community service, so that's one of the things we didn't mention, but there is an interest in this. They do actually have more. The Yankelovich values data shows that they are more like boomers in the fact that they want to change the world. So just as we boomers were optimistic, those of us raised in the 60s, all the things that you were talking about, the millennial generation wanted to. They may give differently and they're involved differently, but they really want to do that. So it's very important to be reaching back, to be working with students, and I have a great opportunity because of the advertising educational board that I sit on college campuses every year, and I spend a lot of time talking to young people, and of course I'm still trying to recruit them all into the nonprofit sector's career.